Welcome back to Undulations. So today I'm going to talk about the Folktek Nano Garden, and it's a device that the more I use it, the more I like it. It's pretty expensive, but if you think about the central component, which is basically a module, and then you add in the case and the resonant feelers here that make sounds, I get it, I understand, and the main reason I bought it, I actually touched it in a store, and it was just sort of the overall aesthetic of it. I really like the look of it, and it's got a turtle on it. How can you argue with that? Just a moment about the basic features. It's got two inputs, left and right, where the left is basically by default listening to the contact mics and these external structures. You can plug something into the left input and override that, so you could plug some other synth into it. The right input doesn't have anything by default, and that's definitely where you can add another source. But then once these two sides are sent into the module here, which is actually a sort of combination of Alter 1 and Alter 2 modules from Folktek, then you get effects that distribute the inputs across the two different stereo channels. So if you run the mix completely dry, then you'll hear, for example, the way I have it set up now, I'll hear these feelers on the left, and then I would hear this kalimba on the right, and that works out fine. Normally I run the mix fairly high up, and so I want to go into what the different types of effects are on this main module. The Alter modules are all about different delay effects, reverb effects, and so I'm just going to sort of run through the list up front, and then we're going to go through the individual ones. I'll do a few things using the resonant antennae, but a lot of what I'll do will be with the kalimba. Kalimba is a good way to investigate reverb and delay, just because you can make it as sort of percussive or sustaining as you want. There's a long delay, that's the first setting, and then there's what is called a tight notated granular delay. Really like that one, that's number 2. Then a huge plate reverb, and that is the third one. The thing I'm going to do at the end, which I've already shot the video for, I use the plate reverb in that, and it sounds really nice. Number 4 is a choral reverb. Number 5 is a palindrome reverse delay, so you get forward and reverse delay repeats that alternate. Number 6 is a pitch delay, and then number 7 is referred to as a time stretch / glitch delay, and I'll go into each of those a little bit. Just a word about the controls up front. They do a little something different for each one, so they're given a generic label of X and Y, and then there's a mix knob and a filter knob. The filter is not very resonant, so it really is just a way to sort of smooth out some of the highs that you might have. I like to basically set that and leave it, not really much for sweeping it. Then the 5th control really is the clock control, and that has a huge effect on the overall system, whereas the delays might keep the pitch intact. The clock definitely is changing sampling rates, and the whole thing is digital in there as far as I know. And then a super important feature on the Nano Garden is the CV control. So each of those 4 knobs has a CV input, and the one that I find the most useful, it's what I use in the last shot of this video, is to control the time, what is typically the time, so the X knob. That gives a real sort of like shimmering and tremolo to the pitch that's pretty cool. So anyway, let's just go through some of the different effect settings. Okay, so now I've got the mix completely dry, and if I tap, you can hear that in the left channel. It's a little hard to get the levels right, so there might be some clipping. That'll be okay. But one thing to point out, it's not like there's a left Nano Garden and then a right Nano Garden. It's all just mic'd up and sent into that left channel. Now I've got the kalimba hooked up. Let's see if I can get a note out of that. Okay, that one's definitely a little bit loud. Now, as soon as I turn up the mix, you'll start to hear both instruments on both sides. And I'll just make the comment that this device is, it's not meant to be completely clean. So we're going to hear sort of some of the hiss and drag of reverb and delay type of devices, which is, I don't know, it's just part of the aesthetic. So now when I stroke one of these things, you can hear that in both channels. And they can be plucked also. A lot of people talk about how this has sort of a cinematic vibe. Oh, and by the way, on the kalimba, I just have a contact mic taped onto it. So this is pretty standard delay. This is time here. And so it's a little bit of a looper in a sense. And then you can change the amount of decay. And I think if you have it all the way up on the feedback, that it basically repeats continuously. And then you can hear what the clock does as well. Okay, let's move on to the second setting, which is the tight notated granular delay. And you do that by pushing the turtle. And so now we're in that. Completely dry. Turned up the mix. So you basically get more like tones that are based on the clock and the time. Once you get down to a small enough delay size. So let's move on to the third one. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because the last thing is all about it. This is the plate reverb. So that one's really pretty. Going to move on. The fourth one is the choral delay, which I like a lot as well. Seems to really pick out the notes on the kalimba. 5 is the palindrome. That's a single note on the kalimba. Again, it seems like some of these effects are a little bit more intuitive when you've got a clear tone, like on the kalimba. Okay, so then the 6th one is a pitch delay. Hello? Wow, that's some unusual sounds. Okay, that one's really cool. Take a little while to try and figure out what to do with it. And then I'm going to hold down the turtle's back to turn it into the 7th mode. So this is the time stretch glitch mode. And again, there's a lot of aspects of trapping sounds in the delay and then changing the time. Okay, so this has been very cool, and I hope that you've gotten something out of seeing the different settings on the Nano Garden. Okay, so for the last shot of this video, I did it earlier this morning and thought it turned out nice. Really like a lot of the different sounds that are coming out of it. What I've got going is a sequence on the Lifeforms Nano sequence, and then that's going into the Akemie's Taiko. So I'm triggering it and taking the pitch information and having that go into the Taiko. And then that sound is coming out to the Rosie for output. And I've also got the Make Noise STO coming out to the Rosie for output as well. And then I just took that output and ran that into both channels of the Nano Garden. And then the only sort of extra thing that I did was take some LFO CV from the Make Noise Maths and run that into the time on the Nano Garden. And that gives sort of this little bit glitchy, kind of shimmery tremolo sound. It kind of really starts to destroy the continuity of the sound when you're running it through a plate reverb like that. So I thought it was pretty cool, and I feel like the overall outcome was nice. I'm going to do something a little bit different. Lots of times I'll do a whole bunch of different sort of attempts at a shot like this, and maybe I'll just show one, maybe the one that I like the most, maybe not. I might put one of them on Instagram or something like that that's slightly different. And this time though, I'm just going to run a set of them, I think 4 in a row. And so even though it's sort of like 4 different shots, it's continuous. I'm using the same setup. Controls that I'm doing, I'm changing the fundamental pitch on the Akemie's Taiko to give sort of a chord progression. I'm using the maths on and off to kind of introduce that glitchy effect, and I'm using the SDO to send some nice chords out into the mix. So I hope you enjoy listening to how it turned out. I'll be back next week for more about the Craft Synth 2.0. Thanks a lot for watching.